Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about deficiencies versus diseases. I think that's how you say that. Public lands being sold for development, and just to shake things up, do hedgerows work? So let's do it. All right, everyone. Well, welcome to Tuesday. I hope your weeks are off to the right kind of start, whatever that may be. It's been hot here and still rainy, which basically just equates to thick. It's thick air season. That started, so that's exciting to work in. You know those bands they tie around the waist of athletes and then have them run against the tension? That's what it feels like to farm here in the summer. It's like someone just constantly just sort of pulling on you as you move. The shade is very welcome to this time of year, which is my way of bringing us to our first topic du jour, hedgerows. I got this question a while back on YouTube from @MissJ0913. That has been on my mind for a while to discuss, who wrote, quote, "I just saw a Facebook post that says a single row of native plants along a field can reduce pests by up to 90%. No pesticides needed. We need our farmers to embrace this. What are your thoughts?" End quote. 90%. Oh boy. Okay. First, thank you for this question. This is very fun. And also thank you for the chance to remind everyone that you should probably not get any information from Facebook. Not that this is dangerous info, obviously, and yes, farmers should embrace hedgerows, but 90 is a lot. I've said this before, but I have to have a Facebook account to manage some soccer pages, and I don't have any friends or follow any pages on there. But most of the stuff that pops up is soccer stuff, but even the soccer stuff is mostly inaccurate. So I can only imagine what bad gardening advice is on there. So in general, I might take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, with that obligatory mini rant out of the way, no, as much as I'd love to believe that to be true as well, 90% is not true, or at least not, it's a little misleading or unprovable. Hedges filled with native plants have demonstrated increases in pest predators. That is a thing, but how effective those pest predators are on the pest populations of crops is variable or less defined. There are just not a ton of studies on this particular subject in general, and it's one of those types of studies that are hard to control for because so let's say like a nutrient study that can be carried out in a pot in a greenhouse, a hedgerow study has to be carried out in the field where the variables are as dynamic as the number of insects. Here's a little of what the research says, however. One 2014 study compared restored California native perennial hedgerows to what they called unenhanced field edges consisting of commonly occurring semi-managed non-native weeds and found, quote, "economically important pests were fewer and parasitoid wasps were more abundant in hedgerows than weedy crop edges. There was no difference in predatory arthropod abundance between edge types, but there was greater predator richness in hedgerow than weedy edges. Predatory ladybugs were more abundant and aphids were lower in fields with hedgerows up to 200 meters into fields, the maximum extent of observations. Fewer of the fields adjacent to hedgerows reached threshold pest levels requiring insecticide application. Benefits of hedgerows to pest control from parasitism extended to 100 meters, but not to 200 meters into fields. Farm-scale hedgerow restoration can provide pest control benefits up to 100 to 200 meters into fields, and multiple hedgerows around fields could enhance pest control throughout entire fields, reducing the need for chemical pest control," end quote. So some increased pest predation up to 200 meters into the field is a great thing, and that study is positive in that way, but not holy cow, 90% of pests went away positive. However, hedges can also get kind of complicated. Like in a 2024 study on hedgerows and orchards in the journal Agriculture, Ecosystems and Environment, the researchers found that, quote, "hedgerows were negatively related to wild bee richness and abundance within the orchard and positively related to natural enemy richness and abundance at the field margin, but not within the orchard," end quote. So in this study, there were essentially more pest predators, but fewer native bees, which could have an effect on pollination down the line. And so for that reason, this study sort of suggests that perhaps the hedgerows need to be designed with specific insects species in mind for the crop needing protection or pollination. In a nutshell, it's just not that simple. Interestingly, though, there does seem to be a consistent measurable correlation between how much natural habitat is around an area and pesticide use that occurs in areas with low amounts of natural habitat. That would be like monoculture monocultures, for instance. From one study, quote, we found that the proportion of harvested cropland treated with insecticides increased with the proportion and patch size of cropland and decreased with the proportion of semi-natural habitat in a county, end quote. In other words, places where there was little diversity of wild plants because of significant conventional monoculture type farming had higher rates of pesticide use. Effectively, they needed to spray more because there were fewer pest predators. Ultimately, native habitats like that are absolutely important, and there are several other interesting studies along the lines to dive into at some point, but the pests are not just about environment. Full stop. They are about the quality and state of your soil. They are about the timing of your planting, about moisture and other abiotic stresses like heat and wind and etc. And also, indeed, the habitats and food for the native pest predators. Most growers who maintain native hedges will tell you they definitely seem to help, and hedgerows bring something else to the table, from shade to birds to snakes, etc. But 90% efficacy of anything is, well, something you will only read on Facebook. Generally speaking, as a big fan of hedges myself, no one thing alone will do all that work. There is no magic bullet in farming. It's never going to come. It doesn't exist. It's not going to happen. And hedges, as awesome as they are, can't do it alone. Anyway, so much more I could add to that and will over time on the efficacy of hedges, because it is a very interesting, very complex conversation. But for the moment, let's take a break and then talk about identifying deficiencies versus diseases. BRB. Is it raining? I feel like it's always raining. I shouldn't even ask. I should be like, is it not raining? That's where I'm at right now. Today's episode is brought to you by Farmhand. If you're listening to this, you probably found 5 rare minutes to breathe. But what got pushed back further down the to-do list to make that happen? If it's your CSA newsletter, you're not alone. Farmhand's new newsletter builder was made for busy farmers. It automates weekly emails, drives add-on sales, and makes it easy to keep your customers in the loop without spending hours behind a screen. It launches this summer, but our listeners can request early access now. Visit farmhand.partners/no-till. That's farmhand.partners/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Does this show bring you $2 or $5 worth of value per month? I hope so. That would be great. You can chip in a little bit, and I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Jesse Turretts, who writes, quote, "Hey, Jesse, it's Jesse. I'd love to hear more about how to identify soil or environmental issues by looking at the plants. How do nutrient deficiencies affect plants? How does cold or heat generally affect plants? Overwatering, underwatering? The weather has been so weird here in Southern California, and I just can't tell if my plants are stunted from the cold or from a soil deficiency. Thanks," end quote. Okay, so this is a great question, Jesse. That is, how, if it's not obvious, can you tell what is ailing your plants? Like if it's a pest, you can often see that it's a pest, though not always, in the case of, say, thrips or ground aphids or vine borers or something like that. But yeah, you can see stuff eating your plants generally when the plant is being eaten by bugs. But when the plant just looks off, or when it begins to wilt, or like you said, when it just stops growing, how do you know what is happening? Obviously, every plant is going to react a little differently to every situation. Like tomatoes have different nutrient requirements at different points in their lives, no less. So they may react differently to a specific soil than, say, beets. But anyway, let's start with the simplest thing to say here. Deficiencies typically show up in the color of the leaves. That is not across the board, but it does track. What I mean is that unlike a pest or disease, or even overwatering, which often makes the plant look wilty or make it look weak, nutrient deficiencies usually first appear in the leaves in a way that is uniform and often involves either consistent yellowing or even purple on the leaves. So speaking about tomatoes, since they are generally the crop that we see deficiencies most often and are easiest to identify, a magnesium deficiency, for instance, may show up like yellowing between the veins of the otherwise healthy leaf, or a phosphorus deficiency may show up looking like the tips of your tomato leaves were dipped in some sort of old grape juice, or it gets a little brown and almost crunchy. Yellow leaves can also simply be a sign of poor nitrogen access. So they may be growing slow. They may look a little yellow. That's generally a nitrogen thing. Of course, it's not always color. Sometimes when the leaves of the plant are looking brown and crispy, that can be an iron deficiency, or when the fruit of a tomato or plant have a brown spot on the bottom, that's called blossom end rot and is typically associated with poor calcium. If you have spots on the leaves, however, that is typically a sign of disease, like early blight, for instance, that shows up in brown spots with rings in them, giving the leaves an ugly sort of polka dot vibe. Now, that's not universal. Chlorosis caused from overwatering can have a yellow look as well, though it eventually leads to wilting, and, well, you can smell and feel it in the soil. If the soil is mucky, the plant roots can't breathe, and the plant leaves can't photosynthesize and can't get the nitrogen they need, thus the yellowing. Underwatering, well, you can feel that too. The soil feels dry and the plant, will usually kind of hunch over and look wilted and dying. Now, sometimes it is plant specific. For instance, if you see a squash plant randomly begin to wilt and die really quickly, that could be a sign that you have vine borers, which you can identify by digging around the stem of the plant and looking for the little vine borer itself. So it presents like a disease or even maybe an abiotic stress, but is actually a pest. Again, every plant reacts a little differently and has its own sort of problems, and there can also be combinations of deficiencies or abiotic stresses like heat, water, nutrients, etc. So it's good to look up issues as they arise to get better at identifying them because, like I said, every plant has its own unique reactions, but by and large, to way oversimplify it, uniform discoloring is generally a deficiency, and spots or wilting or leaves or stems dying are diseases, pests, or some other stressor. And the only way to know for sure is to ask an agronomist. Now, I would be curious how different, if you were trying to generalize these things, you all would describe diseases versus deficiencies. Let me know what I get right, what I get wrong, what did I miss. Otherwise, it's break time. And when we come back, the housing development's coming to your public lands. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by FarmRaise. Still struggling with your balance sheet? Your lender's asking for a balance sheet and you're stuck with a spreadsheet mess or guessing your numbers? FarmRaise Tracks takes the stress out of farm finance. With one click, you can generate an accurate, up-to-date balance sheet that shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. No accounting degree required. You'll be ready for loan applications, tax season, or just a clearer picture of where your farm stands. Join thousands of farmers using Tracks to build stronger businesses. Get 20% off with code NOTIL20 at farmraise.com for the lifetime of your membership. All right, back to the show. Okay, so I saw the other day that there's a new proposal to sell public lands to private organizations to build housing on. This proposal is included in the big tax and spending bill that's going through Congress right now and would require the U.S. Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management to identify and sell between 2.2 million and 3.3 million acres of public land across 11 western states. Those include Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Nevada, maybe both, New Mexico, Oregon, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming for, quote, the development of housing to address associated community needs, which is very jarringly not well defined. So the lands will be sold under the suggestion of creating affordable housing while having no specific requirements to do so. Nifty. Now, according to the released fact sheet, these are not obviously going to be national monuments or national forests being sold off, but things like hiking trails and campgrounds, etc., could be in the crosshairs. Though the buyers will be required to build housing, there are no provisions requiring this housing to be affordable, which will do little to remedy the housing crisis in those states and out west. Is it uncommon for governments to sell off public land? No, not necessarily, just not to this degree and not with so little oversight. Moreover, public lands will also, in this spending bill, be timbered heavier and more widely released for gas, coal, oil, etc. This all, of course, comes at a time when farmland and natural habitats are increasingly less available. If someone wanted to propose we leased the lands to ecological farmers, perhaps to increase our food security and supply, then I would certainly be game to hear that proposal. Under the current proposal, however, all the land that will be developed will be within 5 miles of a city center, which, if you will remember my segment from last week about the importance of green space and forests to physical human health, could have consequences beyond just having drive a little further to hike. Physical and mental health consequences. Housing crises are certainly an issue and are certainly complicated, but they can be solved without selling all of our public lands. It just requires creativity and vision and some huge investments from the government, because land is more than just a financial asset or a liability, but a very literal part of ourselves via our health. Anyway, I hope those places enjoy their new gated communities, or ticky-tackies, though. I'll bet those will be super scenic. So that's neat. Otherwise, on that cheery note, I think that's gonna do it for, what is it today? Tuesday. Yeah, we'll call it a Tuesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is now officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. You can learn more about all of that in the show notes. Please make sure to like and subscribe and/or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. She will be happy to help you out. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just go from one level up to another level, or you sign up in the month of June, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to John Young. John, in fact, true story in this fictional world. John is kind of staring at the sign at the diner, right? That reads, help wanted, must be unattached, minimal time travel required, apply within. And thinks, well, I could use some extra cash, why not? And goes to apply. The server that's in the front, the hostess, sends John back into the office, and he's met by the gruff owner of the diner. Famous guy around town. Everybody loves him. The gruff owner of the diner looks at John and he says, it doesn't pay well and there is a non-zero chance of death. And to which John, replies, well, it sounds like basically every other job, honestly. And the owner nods and tells John, fair, you're hired. Take this home tonight and put it under your pillow when you go to bed. Then he hands John a small, sort of unassuming flat box. That's it? John asks. Yep, says the owner. The crew, when you get there, will walk you through the rest. John, always down for a good adventure, takes the box from the owner and heads home to put it under his pillow. Why? Well, that is for tomorrow, assuming we get more signups, on What a Maritime to Be Alive. Nailed it. All right. Thanks for watching and/or listening. We will see you for Wednesday. Awesome.